Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today we are watching the top 10 conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. So let's check it out and see if we know anything, guys.
We're stuck with the government offering the people an implausible explanation.
Turns out that some conspiracy theories are actually not just theories.
We've got
I mean, we all know the government's and people.
Cover-ups.
bad science.
Bad scientists.
It's all here. Let's check it out.
Were former members and even high-ranking members of the Third Reich ever involved in scientific research in the United States after the Second World War? Well, surprisingly, yes. It was all part of Operation Paperclip. This was a
Yeah, I'm sure we've all heard of this. The US government hired Russian scientists.
covert program conducted by the United States after the Second World War to recruit German scientists, engineers, and technicians, particularly those involved in rocketry, aerospace, and intelligence work. They wanted to bring these experts to America and then use them for their knowledge and expertise, while also preventing them from falling into the hands of the Soviet Union during the emerging Cold War. These scientists were offered immunity and security clearances in exchange for their cooperation and relocation to the US, but some stuff ended up getting swept under the rug. You see, President Truman agreed to the program, but only under specific conditions. The scientists couldn't have been members of that party. But some scientists were just too smart to pass up, even with their involvement in the Third Reich, so the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency destroyed evidence that linked certain scientists to the Third Reich while creating false political biographies for them.
Next up, we have a pretty dark conspiracy theory that no one actually wanted to be true, but ended up being true anyways. The theory that the government was using the deceased bodies of young men and women to test the effects of nuclear radiation, aka Project Sunshine. After the United States dropped nuclear
No way, that's despicable.
explosives Little Boy and Fat Man over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nuclear war went from being some kind of far-off fantasy to a very scary reality. The problem with this was the government had very little knowledge of the effects of nuclear radiation on the human body. And so, in true corrupted official fashion, they began testing those effects on the deceased bodies of US citizens. At the time, this was kept secret from the public, but because they did put out a statement saying that they were testing the effects of radiation on human tissue, the public began speculating that they were doing, well, exactly what they were doing. All in all, they took body parts from deceased individuals belonging to somewhere around 1,500 families. The project started in 1953, but it wasn't revealed until 3 years later in 1956, after growing public concern and internal pressure forced the government to disclose.
Have any musicians ever been under government
Oh yeah, sure, America's the greatest country.
surveillance
No country's better than any other ones.
because of their politically charged music? 100%, including John Lennon, who was known for his activism and outspoken views against the Vietnam War and other political issues. The FBI was particularly concerned about Lennon's influence. He was, and still is, one of the most famous musicians of all time, and there was a real concern that his anti-war activism could rally enough opposition to the government to cause some real problems. So the FBI started spying on Lennon, collecting information on his activities, speeches, and connections to various activist groups. There was wiretapping, his mail was monitored, agents were even sent to snoop in on his friends and groups he was involved with. The FBI also compiled extensive files on Lennon and Yoko Ono. He may have been the most famous surveyed person at the time, but Lennon was far from the only person the FBI was watching.
Next up, we have the gaydar conspiracy theory, which unfortunately in the 1980s was proven to be much more than just a theory. In the 20th century, both public and political opinions of homosexuality were quite well known, and they weren't good. It was around this time that Canadians came up with the theory that their government had developed some kind of gaydar to locate and terminate the employment of homosexuals working as civil servants, as Mounties, or in the military. The thing is, Canada actually did that. Believe it or not, in the 1960s, they hired a university professor to create a machine that would determine sexual preference, which at the time it was believed he did successfully. The machine worked by measuring pupil dilation in relation to homosexual imagery, and it was used to terminate or exclude over 400 men from working in, for, or adjacent to the Canadian government. The existence of the machine was revealed in 1980, and in 1981, a documentary entitled The Valor and the Horror was created to showcase the gross mistreatment of the homosexual community in Canadian workforces at the time.
If I were to tell you that the Church of Scientology infiltrated 136 government organizations in the 70s, would you believe me? Because it really did happen. Operation Snow White was one of the largest infiltrations of the US government in history. It was a huge scheme cooked up by the Church of Scientology. Around 5,000 agents were sent to get into all sorts of government agencies like the IRS, the DEA.
I mean, I bet you any money the Vatican have done that, the Catholic Church have done that.
Foreign embassies, even private agencies that were critical of L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. Their main target was the United States, but other countries were involved too. Their goal was to listen in on conversations using wiretaps and snatch up all these documents on the church, but the government wasn't having it, and in 1977 the FBI raided several Scientology spots with 156 agents. In 1979, Mary Sue Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard's wife, and some other high-ranking Scientologists ended up receiving jail time.
Next up, we have the former conspiracy theory.
Are you going to tell us what for?
Outlining the United States government's dark tactics used to deter its people from drinking during Prohibition in the 1920s. In 1927, after many reports of people
We want beer. We want beer.
People getting violently ill after consuming even the tiniest amount of alcohol began to circulate, the public began coming up with theories as to why that might be. The most popular theory being that the government was somehow poisoning their supply. Of course, seeing as it's on this list, that theory did turn out to be true. In the early 1930s, the government actually admitted to having tainted a large amount of alcohol with methanol, a commonly used antifreeze, and then distributing it to the public. So the government admitted to their wrongdoings, but maybe not fully. They claimed the amount of methanol added to the alcohol wasn't enough to be lethal, just enough to deter people from drinking. However, during the time in which the tainted alcohol circulated, around 10,000 deaths were reported. Cause of death? Poisoning. Coincidence? Probably not.
In 1982, one of the worst video games in history was released, E.T. the Extraterrestrial for the Atari 2600. The game was created by Howard Scott Warshaw, who has even come out admitting to how awful the game was. He was under a really tight time constraint, completing the game in just 5 weeks. The terrible game was a total flop upon release. Not only was it bad, there was also a bit of a video game recession in 1983. Well, not long after this game came out, a story started to spread around schoolyards across the country that Atari was plagued with all these unsold E.T. video game cartridges. So, desperate and embarrassed, they resorted to burying them out in the middle of the New Mexico desert.
That's actually true. I think somebody found them recently.
Like they were the mob disposing of a body after a hit. It's a pretty ridiculous story. A lot of people thought it was just, youngsters exaggerating and blowing the whole thing out of proportion. But it turns out that this urban legend was actually all true. In 2015, the cartridges were even dug up and sold off, allowing
There you go.
all those who'd missed out on this confusing and really gaudy game in the early 80s, to give it a try for themselves.
Next up, we have the conspiracy theory that the government controls the weather, which isn't actually a conspiracy theory, but just a scientific reality. It's called cloud seeding, which is an age-old technique that uses silver iodide particles to promote rain. Basically, they send planes into the sky to shoot particles into the clouds, which causes the water droplets to get heavy, which causes it to rain. See? science. And it's not new science either, it's actually like 60 years old. The technology was used during the Vietnam War to wash out the Ho Chi Minh Trail, making it difficult for US adversaries on the ground to maneuver around combat areas. Countries that currently use cloud seeding include the United Arab Emirates, China, and, of course, the US. While deciding when it's going to rain might seem pretty cool, there is a downside to the practice as well. Too much silver iodide can lead to flooding and pollution, which in turn could cause respiratory issues, skin issues, and gastrointestinal problems. So, you know, if you're the government watching this, seed wisely, please.
In 1975, during a congressional testimony, it was revealed that the CIA had been working on a heart attack pistol, which is gonna sound like something out of a spy movie when I describe it,
Really
but
does.
it was, and maybe still is, very much a thing. It's a covert weapon that shoots a tiny dart capable of piercing clothing without leaving much of a mark at all, and when it hits its target, the person might not even realize it. They might just feel a little sting or nothing at all. The dart carries a deadly poison, and it all disintegrates once it's in the body, making it almost impossible to detect in an autopsy. The poison works fast, causing a heart attack soon after entering the bloodstream. All of this was revealed during a US Senate hearing in 1975. The CIA had to own up to some of their shadier activities at the time, and this heart attack weapon was one of the things they
And this is only ones that we have found out about. Can you imagine what they actually have?
had to disclose.
And finally, we have Operation Northwoods, which never happened, but almost happened, and if it did happen, it would have been pretty messed up. In the 1960s, the United States had planned an attack on Cuba known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. On April 17th of 1961, the US attempted to carry out the invasion on Cuban soil, but were quickly thwarted by Cuba's military forces. While some members of the American Brigade, known as Brigade 2506, managed to escape, almost 1,200 surrendered, and more than 100 men were killed. The ordeal ended on April 20th of the same year, but conspiracy theories following the failed invasion certainly did not. US citizens began speculating that the government was planning flagship operations, attacks on their own people that they would blame on Cuba to encourage a divide between the two countries and to make themselves look better. Well, it turned out that the people were right. Operation Northwoods, while it never went ahead, was an operation in which the government had planned to stage a communist Cuban terror campaign on Miami, Florida, after which they would arrest Cuban agents and then release prepared documents substantiating Cuban involvement. Basically, they were embarrassed after losing big time to Cuba and were looking for a way to save face. Luckily, the operation never made it out of the planning stages, and it was later revealed in 2001, with officials stating that the reason it took them so long to disclose the project was simply that it was incredibly embarrassing that the idea ever gained as much traction as it did in the first place. And I agree, that is incredibly embarrassing.
Well, I hope we've calmed you all down for the night if you're watching this at night.
I can't wait to see, like, in the next 20 years, what kind of part 2 we could come up with for this video.
Exactly. And there you go, guys. That is the top 10 conspiracy theories that were actually true. If you enjoyed the video, remember to subscribe, like the video, and go on over to Most Amazing Top 10 and give them a like as well, because it is a cracking video. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.